for I know it's poison, but I drink anyways. I know it's not good for me, my excessive use of my phone or technology. I know it's not good for my heart, my mind, my relationships, my soul, but I let myself become consumed anyway. It becomes a dependence for me. And the Bible has a word for that. It's called idolatry. There's a passage of scripture I want to share with you in the book of Isaiah where the prophet Isaiah kind of calls out idolatry to the people. And as I read this, I want you to think of your phone. This is what it says. He first cuts down a cedar. With half he makes fire to warm himself and barbecue his supper. He eats his fill, sits back satisfied with his stomach full and his feet warmed by the fire. Ah, this is the life. And he still has half left for a god, made to his personal design, a handy, convenient, no god to worship whenever so inclined. Whenever the need strikes him, he prays to it, "Save me, you're my God." Pretty stupid, wouldn't you say? Don't they have eyes in their heads? Are their brains working at all? Doesn't it occur to them to say, half of this tree I used for firewood, I baked bread, roasted meat, and enjoyed a good meal, and now I've used the rest to make a repulsive no God? Here I am, praying to a stick of wood. This lover of emptiness, of nothing, is so out of touch with reality, so far gone that he can't even look at what he's doing, can't even look at the no God stick of wood in his hand and say, this is crazy. Today, when it comes to idols, we may not have a block of wood, but we have a block of metal and glass. And half the time we use our phone for something useful. We call, we check the weather, we order food, we communicate, we navigate. But then, almost without noticing, it becomes an idol. We begin to worship it. Not in the conventional sense. You know, worshiping idols isn't just about bowing down to statues. It's whatever we give our ultimate trust, time, dependency, affection, and allegiance to, something other than God. And so we turn to it in boredom and stress and pain. We obey its notifications like commands. We seek affirmation through it. We cry, "Save me," through distraction, validation, escape. And it becomes a gateway to so many other vices and idols in our life. And we become so far gone that we can't even look at what we're doing, at the no God block in our hand and say, this is crazy. This is crazy how much I'm dependent on this thing. But it's in this series, Left to Our Own Devices, where we are saying and recognizing that it is crazy. And you know what? Maybe it's just me overthinking, just a side note, but have you ever noticed the Apple logo? A piece of fruit with a bite taken out of it? Almost like a quiet echo of the fall in Genesis with Adam and Eve. It's a subtle, constant reminder of temptation right there in our hands. Probably just a coincidence, but it makes you think. However, today I want to share an antidote to the toxicity we often absorb from our phones and computers and TVs and any screen we stare into, and a kind of idol breaker type of practice. And the consistent remedy that keeps emerging in everything I've studied and seen is simple but powerful. It's rest. Can any of you use rest in your life right now? Any moms out there looking to get some rest today on Mother's Day? Listen, rest isn't just a nice idea. It's not laziness. It's not weakness, but it's a rhythm that God wove into creation itself. In Genesis chapter 2, it says this, "So the creation of the heavens and the earth and everything in them was completed. And on the seventh day, God finished his work of all creation, so he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation." In the Genesis story, the Creator God himself rested on the seventh day, and in doing so, he built a rhythm into the fabric of creation. For 6 days, we work and labor, we wrestle with the earth, but on the seventh day, we stop, we breathe, we come to rest, and that rhythm became what the Bible would later call Sabbath. And observing a Sabbath, this day that God blessed and made holy, where you rest, actually becomes one of the 10 Commandments. Well, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But as we talk today about rest and the Sabbath, and what it really is, I want to explore it both as a general spiritual practice and also its connection to our relationship with technology and the idea of having digital rest or a digital Sabbath. So I'll kind of be flip-flopping back and forth between just practicing rest in your life, but also practicing digital rest. But let's get started with a definition of that word Sabbath. It's the Hebrew word Shabbat, and it means to cease, to cause to stop, to rest, to put away, and sometimes to celebrate completion. So when God rested from creation, he essentially Sabbathed. He ceased. And so this rhythm of work and rest is an ancient practice as old as the earth itself. God works and we work. God rests, so we rest. Work and rest live in a symbiotic relationship. And here's what we need to notice first here is the very fact that God rested. He did not need to rest, but he chose to rest anyways to set a precedent, to set an example. And for you and I that may think, you know what, oh, I'm a type A, I'm high capacity, I'm always on, I always need to be producing and be productive, God Sabbathed. You know, we have kids at home, or you're growing a business, or you have deadlines and demands. God Sabbathed. He built this rhythm into the very fabric of creation, yet it's so easily misunderstood. And today, it's countercultural. We live in a culture where productivity and the hustle is glorified. Staying busy is glorified. Cities and businesses no longer pause on Sundays. Shout out Chick-fil-A, right? Industries constantly hustle for our attention. We have sports on Sundays now and sports on the weekends, and we got sports on Mother's Day, right? And that's why maybe some of you are watching this. You couldn't make it to church, right? Because your kids had sports on Mother's Day. We've become so over busy, digitally distracted as well. In his book, The Tech-Wise Family by Andy Crouch, Pastor Andy mentioned and recommended this book last week. He has a whole chapter about rest and the importance of Sabbath. And he says this: empires do not offer a Sabbath. Our culture doesn't offer a Sabbath. Sabbath and rest must be taken in the face of the empire. As such, the Sabbath functions, listen to this, as a circuit breaker for idolatry. The beautiful thing about the Sabbath is that you discover your dependencies and are freed from them in the same act. It also resets the other 6 days in a way that nothing else can. And Sabbath, therefore, is the linchpin practice of resistance. See, the idea of rest sounds wonderful, but in reality, it's radical. It's a countercultural act of resistance to the forces, both spiritual and cultural, that try to pull us away from God's ways and toward a life of constant noise and distraction and busyness. It's resistance against the constant demands of the digital world and not wanting to be left out and not constantly wanting to know what's going on. So in a culture of limitless options, Sabbath, structured and scheduled rest, imposes holy limits. We need limits in our life that remind us that our lives don't depend on constant producing, constant busyness, or digital connection. It is the circuit breaker. Rest is a circuit breaker on idolatry, revealing what we're so dependent on, but also freeing from them in the same moment, right? To tell us that our lives are ordered around God's grace and his provision, not our striving and our self-absorption and connection to the digital world. In his book, Andy makes a powerful observation as well. He says that we've replaced God's design of work and rest with toil and leisure. And that shift explains a lot about why real rest feels so elusive. Work in the biblical sense is meaningful, it's creative and purposeful. It reflects the image of God, who worked in creation and called it good. Human beings are created to co-labor with God, cultivating, building, serving, contributing to the world. But now we see it as toiling. We're toiling. And toil is work gone wrong. It's part of the fall back in Genesis that work became hard. But work today for many of us and many of you might feel burdened, stressful, disconnected from meaning. And therefore, instead of pursuing rest, we pursue leisure. Well, let's take a look at rest in a biblical sense. Rest is not a reward for exhaustion, but a built-in rhythm that renews, restores, and reconnects us with God and others. Rest means stopping, enjoying, and worshiping. It's active in its goodness. Whereas leisure, the thing that we seek instead of rest, leisure is not true rest. It's often escape. It's often passive consumption, scrolling, binge watching, outsourcing enjoyment. It can feel good temporarily, but not all leisure restores the soul. So toil, it wears us down, and leisure kind of numbs us, and both can leave us spiritually, relationally, physically depleted. Now listen, I don't think there's anything wrong with leisure in itself. I love hobbies. I love working out. I love laughing at a good show or watching a good football game. But leisure only becomes a problem when we confuse it for the real thing, when we think it's rest, but it's really just distraction. And then all screens do, if we throw screens into the picture and tech into the picture, it just keeps us on all the time. It contributes to more toil. Often we think that we're receiving some sort of rest when we're scrolling or whatever, or watching content, but really, it's not real rest. It's just more toil, and it's just leisure that kind of numbs us and leaves us empty. So it's not that all leisure is wrong, and we'll talk about that a bit later, and about doing the things that you love to do that feeds your soul. It's whether or not it's delight or distraction. See, delight draws us into gratitude and connection, but distraction pulls us further away from what matters. So the invitation, when it comes to rest, isn't to throw away all leisure and all the things that feed your soul that are fun and joyful and delightful, but we want to think of this about reclaiming Sabbath and rest, a kind of rest that actually restores. To clarify it further, I want to show you this chart. And on this chart, you'll see kind of the difference between God's rhythm of work and rest and our culture, or we'll say the world's version and distortion of toil and leisure. See, God's rhythm is rooted in creation, Sabbath, and purpose. The world's is in fall and escapism and performance. Work is seen as creative, meaningful, and cooperative with God's way, but in the world's way, it's exhausting, anxious, and isolated. Rest with God's way is seen as intentional, worshipful, and renewing, whereas the world's way, rest is passive, numbing, and fleeting. When it comes to our motivation for work and rest, it's stewardship, worship, love for others. In the world's way, it's pressure, fear, and escape. The results of work and rest in God's way are flourishing, joy, presence, community. But in the world's way, it's burnout, disconnection, boredom. Technology's role in God's way and rhythm is limited. Discipline supports creativity and rest rhythms. But in the world's way, it's constant, invasive, and encourages distraction. Relationships are deepened through shared meals, play, worship, and presence in God's rhythm. But in the world's, it's weakened through isolation, individualism, and consumption. The perspective of time is anchored in rhythms and seasons, with Sabbath and day and night and holidays, but with the world, it's fragmented, always on, always being productive, always busy, binge cycles. The goal in God's rhythm is wholeness, image-bearing, intimacy with God and others. But with the world, the goal is productivity or pleasure at the cost of well-being. So with this, it's clear to see what's kind of happening, the distortion that may have be happening in your life as well. And listen, I get it. Rediscovering meaning and purpose in our work is a whole message in its own. That's not really our focus today. Today, we're talking about kind of rest and how our phones and screens don't actually give us that. So when it comes to technology, one of the practice that Andy recommends in the book is something called a digital Sabbath, building in regular rhythms of rest from screens. And here's what that can look like. He says that you should rest and Sabbath from technology for 1 hour a day, 1 day a week, and 1 week out of the year. So 1 hour a day, that's a focused time each day without screens to be fully present. Use it for prayer, conversation, creativity, just to be quiet, to play with your kids. And then 1 day a week, a full day dedicated to rest, stepping away from digital devices. We're going to talk more about this in just a moment when we dive into Sabbath and rest as a whole. But if the thought of turning your phone off for a whole day makes you feel uncomfortable, well, I think that says something about ourselves and our culture. And we'll come back to that. And then he says 1 week a year. And this is an extended stretch to fully unplug, reset. This could be during a vacation or during a season of fasting like Advent or Lent, which is popular. And so when it comes to this extended period of time too, I found this other book called Reconnected by Carlos Whitaker pretty interesting. He did a full 7-week screen detox. He spent 2 weeks with Benedictine monks and 2 weeks on an Amish farm, and then 3 weeks back home to see how all of it impacted his brain and body. He worked with Dr. Daniel Amen, a well-known psychiatrist who ran brain scans and cognitive tests before and after his detox. And get this, Carlos went through actual withdrawal symptoms the first few days. He had an elevated heart rate, night sweats, irritability, like legit withdrawal, because after all, it is a drug, folks. Screens are a drug. But once the noise faded, simple things like walking, eating, just being outside became more vivid. He even said he began to enjoy being bored again. And then the wildest part, after the experiment, his memory shot up from 50th percentile to 99th percentile for adult men in the US. There were only 1% of men with a better memory than him after the detox. And so Dr. Amen, he did his scans and it backed up what he kind of predicted, that reducing screen time, restores the brain, heals the brain's ability to focus, remember, reflect. So if you're finding yourself constantly forgetful or mentally scattered, yeah, it might just be the dang phones. So the question, though, with this and what we can see from this is how good it is to put it away for us, how good it is for our mental health and our spiritual health. And we know all this. But the question here is, what would it look like for you to power off? Even for just 1 hour a day, or 1 day a week, or 1 week out of the year, to build that in, to make space for a God who wants to heal and restore what the world has worn down. But now let's shift and talk more about the Sabbath and what it really is, not just as a concept, but as a way of living. It's a rhythm that invites us to do 4 things: stop, rest, delight, and worship. So the first thing that Sabbath rest does is tells us to stop. Again, the word Sabbath literally means to cease. It's not about creating a checklist for a day of rest, or it's not about earning a break. It's about choosing to step away from the constant motion, a structured moment in time where we deliberately stop our usual work, distractions, and the endless pursuit of productivity. We pause not because everything is done necessarily, but because God invites us to trust Him enough to be able to stop. I mentioned earlier how the Sabbath became one of the 10 commandments, and let's take a look at it in Exodus 20. It says, "Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. You have 6 days each week for your ordinary work, but the 7th day is a Sabbath day of rest dedicated to the Lord your God. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and everything in them, but on the 7th day He rested. That is why the Lord blessed the Sabbath day, and He set it apart as holy." So observing the Sabbath, this one of these 10 commandments, of all the commandments, is the most persistently and casually broken. So now, listen, we would understand, and I believe it's clear, that the Sabbath and doing a Sabbath, it's not a binding command for followers of Jesus. We would understand that Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament law, and therefore we're free from the law in the sense that our righteousness is not tied to our ability to follow it, but it's tied to Jesus' work on the cross and His resurrection. And so even though it's no longer binding, meaning we no longer have to follow it as sort of a law in our life, it still stands as wisdom. It's still something built into the fabric of creation. It's modeled by God before the fall. And I think if we're taking the 10 commandments, and we're talking about the 10 commandments, like don't lie, don't steal or kill or commit adultery or covet, honor your parents, don't worship idols, make sure God is first and the only one we worship, we're all in agreement that these are foundational Christian morals. And we sum it up in the greatest command today that Jesus gives: love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Love God, love others. But I think that this idea of rest can be so easily neglected. Like, yeah, we're not obligated to do that anymore. And so it's not like the rest of these morals that we follow, right? But here's what we need to know, that even though it's not something we're obligated to do, it's a gift. It's something that's given as a gift for us. Jesus famously said in Mark 2:27, the Sabbath was made for people, not people for the Sabbath. He was speaking to a culture that was opposite of ours, where they went too far in creating hundreds of convoluted rules to keeping the Sabbath to make sure that they didn't break it. They were legalistic about it. They were religious about it to an extent where they lost the plot and the purpose of the Sabbath. And they needed to hear that people were not made for the Sabbath. People were not created to follow a Sabbath. Rather, the Sabbath, a day of rest, was made for people. Sabbath is not a rule to be bound by. It's a gift we've forgotten how to open, we've forgotten the importance of it. So what's the practice here when it comes to stopping and following a spiritual practice like rest? Well, it's really simple. It's just create a scheduled time when you will stop. Build space into your week where you will discipline yourself to cease from work and to be refreshed. And here are two helpful tips. Number one is start small. Start where you are, not where you think you should be, right? If a full day feels overwhelming or just completely impossible right now, begin with a half day or a couple hours, a few hours, right? Just start with something and start small. And then think subtraction, not addition. Don't try to cram rest into an already packed schedule. Instead, think, what can I cut out? All right, it's not about doing more, it's about doing less and making space for what matters most. So the question to ask yourself here when entering a time of stopping is to ask, is this a time ceasing what I do on a normal work day? Next is rest. To rest, in a sense, often means to resist. There are powerful forces, both external and internal, that war against our ability to rest. Externally, we face the constant pull of productivity culture, the pressure to stay connected online, to stay relevant, to stay ahead. And internally, we battle anxiety, guilt, restlessness, and that nagging voice that says, you haven't done enough. Well, in Deuteronomy 5:15, God gives the Sabbath command again, but here he ties it to the idea of freedom. He says, remember that you were slaves in Egypt and that the Lord your God brought you out. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So the Sabbath was a reminder for them that they were no longer slaves, that they are to resist that pull of how they acted and how they behaved and how they were constantly working like slaves, to forget their old life, to know that they are freed from that. They are freed from being slaves. And so now the Sabbath day is a reminder not to go back to that, to resist that pull. In fact, many stories in the Gospels take place on the Sabbath, especially stories of healing and deliverance. Jesus often would heal people and deliver people, cast out demons on the Sabbath, and he had his purposes for doing that. But it's almost to show that the Sabbath is a day for healing and freedom. And for us, a time of rest is a reminder that you are not a slave to your schedule. You're not a slave to your grades. You're not a slave to your inbox, to your algorithm or your phone. You are free. Resist that old way and live in freedom. So what's the practice? The practice here when it comes to rest is make a list of what you will not do in your time of rest. Identify a few cultural forces that are anti-rest. So maybe it's just a few things: not watching news, not shopping, not doing weekend work or yard work or certain chores or errands, or maybe it's the digital. You put the phone away, or you just say, you know what, no social media, no TV or entertainment, or maybe it's just turning off the internet for an extended period of time. There was actually an Oxford study done. Oxford University did a study with 467 iPhone users, and they installed an app on their phone that made their phone essentially a dumb phone by turning off the internet. And they found that blocking mobile internet access for just 2 weeks led to improvements in mental health that surpassed the typical effects of antidepressant medications. Wow. Who would have thought, right? And most remarkably, the enhancement in sustained attention ability matched what would be expected from erasing 10 years of age-related cognitive decline. In other words, after just 2 weeks without internet, people's ability to concentrate got so much better that it matched the kind of focus you would expect from someone 10 years younger. So maybe for you, just turning the internet off will give you some rest. Resisting that will give you some rest. And so the question to ask here is, when it comes to eliminating certain things, we ask, is this restful? Does it refill my soul with new energy, emotionally, intellectually, physically, spiritually? Is this really giving me rest? So next is delight. When it comes to delight, this is a reminder that our time of rest is supposed to be life-giving. You know, when God created the heavens and the earth and he rested from his work of creation, it has this idea also that he delighted in all of his work. He saw on each day he created something that it was good. You know, for you and I, it's so easy to lose sight of just how much goodness there is all around us, of how much to be grateful for. We are so drawn to the negative over the positive. Author and pastor Timothy Keller says this: because the world is full of ugly things, we need the Sabbath to feed our soul with beauty. So this is the part where you do the things that celebrate life and love and community. Psychologists have given a great label for when we save up a bunch of your favorite experiences for a single moment or day, and they call it pleasure stacking. And so the Sabbath is a day of pleasure stacking in your home. You feast on your favorite foods. You play. You take a walk. You hike. You have a picnic in the park. You do your nails or favorite self-care activity. You have a campfire. You read fiction or poetry. You make love with your spouse. Amen. You take a nap. You play board games. You have activity and craft and do something with your kids. You do what draws you to the beautiful, what gives you delight. We talked about leisure earlier, and so this all looks different for every one of us, right? Maybe playing the sports and playing pickleball with your friends, right? That brings you joy and delight. Maybe gardening. We're like, oh, does gardening work? It's not about that. Does it bring you delight? Does it bring you joy and God? And so the question to ask here is, does this activity give me deep, visceral joy in God? And finally, our time of Sabbath and rest is about worship. God says to keep the day holy. That means to sanctify it, to set it apart and dedicate it to God for his special purposes. So Sabbath isn't just a day we stop and relax and rest and resist and do what brings us joy. It is, but it's also a day to worship, a time to worship, to reorient your life back to its center in God. For the early Christians, Sunday became the Lord's Day, the day of worship, and honor the resurrection. But regardless of the timing, the point is weekly devotion. Worship isn't just about singing songs and attending church for an hour. Those are beautiful expressions of it and can be a part of a day of rest, and probably should be. But it means also cultivating a spirit of gratitude and praise throughout the day. You let worship flow through your stopping, your resting, your delighting. So Sabbath worship invites us to remember who God is, what he's done, and who we are in him. It's a day that says, it's a time that says, God, this is your day, and so is my whole life. And again, it's about freedom, remembering that you don't have to be a slave to the things in your life, to productivity or to tech or any idol, right? You are free. And so we worship God because of that. So the question we ask here is, does this activity connect me more deeply to God and his goodness and beauty? Listen, at the heart of a Sabbath and a time of rest is a longing, not just for physical rest, but for a soul deep peace. From the seventh day of creation, God wove rest into the rhythm of the world, not as a burdensome rule, but as a gift. A weekly reminder that we are not what we produce, that life is not held together by our effort, but by God's sustaining grace and his provision. But even from the beginning, Sabbath was never the final destination. It was always a signpost pointing forward to something greater. And that something is a someone, and his name is Jesus. In Matthew 11:28, Jesus extends this invitation. He says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." The word rest there in the Greek carries the same meaning as Sabbath, to cease, to recover, to be refreshed. And it's not just about a pause from labor, it's a release from the need to prove ourselves, from the weight of guilt, from the weight of striving. Jesus doesn't just offer rest, he is rest. He doesn't just offer Sabbath, he is Sabbath. He is the fulfillment, everything the Sabbath was meant to teach us, to stop, to trust, to rest, to delight in his goodness, and to worship him. In him, we no longer chase identity through performance. We don't earn rest, we receive it as a gift. So when we practice Sabbath today, when we practice resting, when we stop and we rest and we delight and we worship, whether that looks like a full day set apart or a small intentional rhythm and time where you slow down, we're stepping into that deeper reality. It's more than just a spiritual discipline. It's a declaration that Jesus, you are enough. We're not defined by our busyness. We are not slaves to technology or any idol. We are loved, held, and known by the one who invites us to rest in him. So in a world that never stops, Jesus invites us to stop. In a culture of exhaustion and toil, he invites us to rest in him. In a world full of negativity, Jesus invites us to delight and to live life to the fullest and live life more abundantly. And in the midst of distraction, Jesus draws us back to worship in him. So when we practice Sabbath, we're not just following an ancient rhythm, we're realigning our hearts with Jesus, our true rest. So for you, maybe when it comes to the tech and the digital, what if for an hour a day, a block of time, or a whole week throughout your year, we put tech on hold so that we could live our lives instead of putting our lives on hold to live on tech? Imagine what this could look like in your life. What if instead of always being pulled in a million directions, you made space to stop, rest, delight, and worship? What if you weren't defined by your to-do list or your addiction to your phone, but by the peace that comes from simply being present with God and his creation? That's the kind of rest that Jesus is offering. A chance to slow down, find peace, and remember that he is enough. Imagine how different your life would be with this kind of rhythm. And it's my hope that you could create this and implement this and structure this in a way that is meaningful and works for you. Maybe this is just a new way and a new perspective on your day off. Instead of it just being a day off or just being a weekend or just Saturday or Sunday, see that day or that extension of time as a Sabbath rest, not just a day to binge or consume content and to keep toiling, but a day to set apart and dedicated to God where you're just more intentional with your rest, choosing to do the things that bring you joy at a soul level. Or I just hope this just creates a conversation within your family to just wonder about what this could look like, where you decide just take a single step and just say, you know what, as for me and my family, Sundays, we don't watch TV. Or the internet is off, or the phones are put in a box till sundown. Or you know what, Saturday mornings, we're not doing any work. We're not shopping, we're not doing yard work or cleaning up the house or doing any sort of chore. We're making and eating breakfast together, then going for a walk and enjoying each other. Or maybe for you today, you just need to hear and know that Jesus is enough, that he invites you to rest in him. He offers healing, freedom, and a better way of living. And maybe that's all you need to hear today. So, let's no longer be left to our own devices. Take your life back by going to Jesus, by taking him up on his invitation, because he is the only one who can give us rest and rest for our souls.